Okay, we're on.
So we're going to introduce ourselves first. Some of you may know who we are or not. I'm Philippe Coquette.
Max
This is,
Aaron.
Jim Abbott.
Brad Emberhart.
Yay.
and just to kind of set us up so you know who we are to each other, we're kind of a polyamorous pod together. So we all have some interrelationships going on. Max is my partner. That's how I describe him. He can call himself anything he wants. And we've been together 12 years almost, I believe. And then we've known Brad for
Forever.
10 years or something. And I call Jim my boyfriend. And you want to describe the rest of it according to your version of it?
Go ahead.
Sydney.
Well, I call Jim Jimmy, and he was my favorite fuck buddy for 5 years. And then there was a circle jerk on the Equinox 2015, and Philippe met Jimmy, and they fell in love and started dating. So I started dating Jimmy too, just to make sure that I could date him also. So he's my boyfriend and Philippe's boyfriend. And then Max and I continue to celebrate a lovership as well. So Max and I are lovers. Jimmy and I are boyfriends. Philippe and I are like two grandmas, in my opinion.
Sounds complicated.
So you all can make of that what you will. It can sound complex, can sound confusing to some people, but it's very simple for us.
Well, also,
So far.
one thing Brad always points out is that like the relationship of the four of us evolved slowly over time. It wasn't conceived in its present form in the beginning. It's something that evolved as we got to know each other. And I think that was partially, why we appreciate each other is the time and all the experiences that we've had together that make that a powerful bond.
So one of the things that we came up with when we were preparing this first class is a list of what we called 5 things. No. 5 things you need to know about your poly trajectory that can make it work or doom it to failure. These are just some basic tenets that we've learned either through study or through experience, mostly through experience, of having this relationship happen. And the first one...
Yeah, I just want to say that, and you are also welcome to, I've muted you guys in the audience, but feel free to put any questions or comments that come up in chat, and we will read them. We'll have some time after this little introduction for Q&A. But I just want to start out this series with the reflection that I was feeling was that it's actually, there's a psychological perspective that works for people that are poly-minded and that works for people that are monogamous or solo-minded. And I believe there's a degree of self-reflection or self-inquiry that can help to determine, and this includes for our audience that will be listening later, where you may or may not be a person that for who this model works, even though it's a very broad one. And that's the reason for the 5 principles, and they're very simple, but we just wanted to share, sort of an idea for each person to listen, even if you are already in poly relationship, to listen and think of how these principles affect you personally, because they're not just on and off, they're things that we're always growing more deeply into.
one of the things that I always like to say is that I consider monogamy to be a perfectly acceptable alternative lifestyle. Because and the reason I say that is because although it has been the kind of norm in our more recent history in the world, it actually isn't practiced very often, as we know, because so many people who have, stated monogamous relationships are going outside that relationship in various forms, whether it's to have sex workers or to have a person on the side that nobody knows about, or the long distance lover that nobody knows about, or maybe a don't ask, don't tell kind of experience. There are many, many different levels of what we call monogamy, and some people say monogamish, where you stray outside the kind of till death do us part fidelity model. So a lot of what this is about for me is an exploration of the possibilities of how we can be more open about what we're actually doing in the world, and then experiment as we each desire to, and it can be very different for everybody, with alternative models. Some people call it ethical non-monogamy, which appeals to me.
That's a really great phrase.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to point out that although the culture identifies monogamy as one-on-one relationships, even if you don't think of yourself that way, there's a very strong cultural meme, which is like to find the one and to have that really deep, tender connection with one other that fulfills your hopes and dreams. So even if you're in an open relationship, there's still the cultural layer of the desire for us to be mirrored and met and seen in that way very intimately. So we're just
and committed as well.
Yeah, committed, and all the security and comfort and joy that hopes and terrors that go along with that. So even for people that are in more open poly relationships, there's still going to be this thrust in the culture that, well, who is your one or your primary? And it's something that I think we each have to resolve or
work out
on our own, those projections.
Is there anything you want to say, Brad, about that, or Jim?
I just want to say that what y'all are saying is the prettiest sermon I have ever heard in my life. I have never heard from the best visiting pastor.
Good.
Yay.
Cute. How about you, Jim?
No.
So
we're just one another's balls while you talk.
Okay. The first of the five kind of things that we want to explore is that it's kind of a necessary thing to be able to do this, and that is a willingness to be honest with yourself and others. So some of these things are very basic, and that one in particular, I'm first thing, oh yeah, I'm willing to be honest with myself and others. And it gets challenged by entering into this kind of relationship, because there's so many different levels and ways that we lie to ourselves and others. And it presents a really great opportunity to explore that in ourselves and in our relationship.
Exactly. Well, I think that I have the Scorpio rising. I like my sexuality often to be hidden, and there's a hunter part of my own sexual being. But that is a little different than me being clear when I communicate to others, particularly when we're vulnerable, which is something we're going to talk about, just to say what we're uncomfortable with or what we are comfortable with. So I know that some of our other friends that are poly teachers often say the need to communicate, which is one of our principles, is probably really at the top of the list.
But you jumped ahead.
Well, you asked me if I wanted to say anything.
Stay within the lines. So we all have different styles. This is one of the things. How to be honest. I mean, I don't know how to say how to be honest with yourself. That seems like life's work for me. How to be honest with myself at any given moment. There's so many different things that come into play in that.
Well, I think that's why we call it willingness to be honest.
Yeah.
Because it's not always black and white. Yeah. I mean, I think we could say a lot about, and maybe write some more about each of these, but I don't want to spend like 15 minutes on each.
The second one, I think that the thing about the honesty I wanted to say is that there's a saying that says, without lying, there's no cheating. So the biggest problem, issue that comes up in relationships is always that somebody's cheating. This ends relationships, this destroys friendships, or just, so many different things. And it's usually, cheating is usually about trying to protect the relationship or the partner's feelings. So we then omit the truth. And so there's always then something broken or something distorted in the relationship you're having with that person because you're not being honest with them. So if you're not, one of the things about being called an open relationship is that you actually have the ability and the willingness to share everything with each other because you love them. And so if I have a desire, let's say Max and I have been together 5 years and all of a sudden I have a desire to be with somebody else, to have a different kind of relationship. And I don't want this to be over. So I may just go, well, I don't want to hurt this. I don't want to destroy this. So I'm just going to not talk about the affair I'm having. And so this is kind of a different way of looking at it, where we start out with, we're just going to tell each other everything that we feel. I guess we make our own,
Well, as an example, Philippe and I started our relationship as an open relationship. I believe him and Brad did as well. But that was very specific. There's a different process for people that start as a closed relationship and then after a few years decide to open it up. And there's even a whole book written about that called Opening Up. But the reason I mentioned that is it is sometimes appropriate when you meet somebody to talk about what relationship style works for you. And I notice that even gay men often don't do that. There's often just the comfort with allowing us to project onto each other like a nice kind of juiciness and then just see how it goes. And we're often unaware of what the projections of the others are until later. Anyway, that's somewhat obvious, but I notice even in queer and gay men, there's a lot of things that are left unsaid, even though the assumption may be that openness is sort of okay, but even if that's unspoken, it could be confusing.
Yes. So the second of the 5 principles is the willingness to respect your partner's needs and desires. So that's a really sticky one, because very often people go into a relationship and they think that someone else's needs and desires are going to be affecting them badly. And so it's,
or even that to have, and I see this more in media than I do actually in real life, which is funny because we kind of live in a media culture, that even to have a desire is a betrayal. And if you listen like to TV, you'll see this theme repeated over and over and over and over again. So even if we don't feel like we're adhering to that ourselves, like, of course, I want you to fulfill your own desires, but there's an unconscious thread that we're taught, which is that's, you know, that you need to get approved. You have to get approval from me first if you're going to have a desire. Right? It's kind of interesting. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, and certainly to get that desire fulfilled or that need to be met.
Like, how dare you?
Yeah, there's sometimes, you know, we don't always meet all of our partner's desires or wishes or needs. As a matter of fact, rarely do people do that. I mean, I think we've all heard of or met couples who are like bound together their whole lives. They're like penguins, and they, you know, go to the very end, and they're just always cuddly and lovey and maybe even sexual for their whole lives. That does happen, and it's just not very common. So what often happens is somewhere along the line, all of a sudden, you know, two people who meet in a polarity and they have all this spark, they can all of a sudden start to become more like each other. So there's more of a merging. The mailman is here, so.
The polarity tends to disappear with time. And I think that's a natural biological progression. Like you start to look more like your dog.
So then you're like, you know, you have this kind of mergy, lovey thing, but then all of a sudden there's a need for that kind of polarity again, that excitement, that ecstatic sexual spark.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to look outside of that. And can that other person be okay with it? You know, can be okay that you are having a different experience than you did when you first got together. So it's this thing of honoring the fact that we each have our needs and desires that are changing and evolving all the time.
Brad, Jim, do you have any reflections on that?
I have some reflections from 5 to 10 minutes ago that probably bring us to the present moment. I feel if I don't say them, I'll be holding back.
Good, please.
Equalize things a little. So
yeah.
One thing is there was talk about honesty and communication, and I realized there's another major factor that's been coming into play the last few days that almost seems to replace sometimes it comes even as a higher need than communication and honesty. And that is just a deep sense of knowing that I completely love this person and would never bring him harm. There's like, I realized in the last few days, if he knows how much I really love him with all of my heart, then he won't have to worry, why didn't he return my text? You know, I didn't return his text because my phone quit working and I had to have Wi-Fi to make WhatsApp work. And I was in a rainstorm and it was lightning and the power was out. But in his mind, it's like he's run off with so-and-so and they're on a romantic rendezvous for the weekend and he's not returning my call. So like, I just realized to tell someone and somehow assure them with all of my heart that they always know that I hold them in the highest regard. And that was a major breakthrough just in the last 3 days. Like it almost felt like, I don't know if Jimmy or I are going to even be able to show up for this fucking workshop that we're helping to facilitate. I don't think we can go because I was like, I think he's going to go to the coast and I'm going to run the other way. But it was all because of communication. So on one hand, I could have said, I'm going off for the weekend. I really want to share a weekend with this person. I hope he'll come on Monday. And that would have been enough. But that communication didn't make it through. And it came up that we still haven't completely established a level of trust that he knows without a shadow of a doubt that I'll never desert him. And I mean, how can we trust ourselves as humans to believe that I'll never do something that surprises myself? You know, I don't even know how much can I trust myself, but I want more than anything after this experience for him to know I'm there for you. You're like the strong tree in my garden. You're an established, rooted presence in my life, which I value as much or more than anything. Like you are my core family, you know, and if somebody knows that for me, they're not going to worry about what I'm doing. If they really know and I have a way to communicate that through my actions, my deeds. Time also helps. There's this need sometimes to like, let's get a relationship started quick. I want a boyfriend. I want to live in partner right now. And this relationship developed over 8.5 years so far. You know, so.
And and you're still developing it.
it's still developing. And for 5 years, it didn't even have a name. I think, 3 years, it was like, this is somebody I get together with to have really hot sex. It's like, you want to come over and fuck? He always says yes. That was like the relationship. We always met right here in this room in my house, fucked in the middle of the floor. That was it. That was good enough. I wasn't like, I wish you were my lover, my boyfriend. Will you be my boyfriend? Once we started boyfriends, I asked him often. I asked him over and over about every other day, will you be my boyfriend? Just so I can hear him say yes.
And I think you're speaking like love languages. Some people need to hear things. Some people want gifts. Some people want to be touched. So like, I love what you're sharing. And it's also like giving us each other permission to be triggered. Like, even if I know like Brad has this unconditional respect and love for me, there's gonna be moments where my own childhood issues come up and I feel abandoned or left out or whatever. And for not to be like, oh, you love me, therefore I can't feel that. To really have, I think this is one of the other things we wrote down. Yeah. That we can feel distraught sometimes and still feel loved, held during that process. Very tender.
Yeah. Thank you for being,
Thank me for being what?
For just being so raw about that and real, and for showing up. Because, like you said, in that situation, I was concerned. I was like, I knew a little bit about what was going on. And so I was concerned also, like, is this going to be okay to be on our computers? And I was like, yeah, hopefully it will be, because that's what it's all about. This is really what it is. We get to actually go through it.
You mentioned like having permission to feel our feelings, to feel our childhood feelings come up, or to feel maybe left out. But if he was feeling that, and I can't speak for him, but I think he might have been feeling a little bit betrayed or left out of communication. But on my end of it, when I found out that he was feeling that way, I really hurt for 2 days. So like, how can we allow somebody else to have their feelings? Like, how can I allow him to feel betrayed or allow him to feel anything that I think is so far from the truth? Like it's very hard for me to sit. I was in the wilderness, not able to communicate with him for 2 days. And the whole 2 days I thought, my lover is hurting his heart. And it's very hard for me to just allow him to have those feelings. I want to like fix it and go, that's not really the way it was. But those were his feelings, I can't say that's not really the way it was. I mean, that's how he saw it, and for a time, an instant.
And that actually leads to the next one of the 5 things, which is the willingness to trust that all the partners in the situation have their own unique path in life. So that we're each going through our own journey, and to honor that journey is totally valid and
like
to be honored. That each
like
person's a sovereign being,
has a soul path, and it's not really up to us to decide what another person's path is, even though often we're taught that we should, or that it'd be so convenient if we could manipulate the path of another. And I think what Brad said is really points to this, is that like you were feeling, I'm just paraphrasing for an example, you were feeling left out, but it's like, but I'm honoring you the whole time. So there could be contradictions in our intentions. I don't know, maybe, Jimmy, did you have anything to share like of that experience over the last 4 days, or I'm just wondering.
I mean, it was, intellectually up here, I knew all of that what he said. And when I did finally talk to him on Monday, well, let me back up. So it's like, I know it up here, but I kind of forgot it here. And when I finally talked to him on Monday, and what he said, it's like, it reminded me here. It's like, it was like what he said was like the perfect thing. It was like the antidote. It was like, oh, right, of course. Billy me, what was I thinking? um, you know, it's like, because I'm probably not the only one, but you know, you kind of grab a hold of something and then your brain starts spinning around and you just kind of spiral mentally out of control and like start catastrophizing about all kinds of stuff that is probably not true. So it's the remembering here that sometimes is, at least for me, can be hard or more difficult.
And just for the audience, I'll just share briefly, like, the personal example is not so important, except that a new housemate that lives with Philippe and I has been bonding with Brad, and they were spending some private, like very intimate time together. And so really, there's five of us in this conversation, and I think we all felt something that Brad was experiencing in different ways. And I'm a person that really loves when things get stirred up. It's like I'm weird that way. But I was also like kind of worried about Jiminy. So, you know, in more hetero-oriented poly groups, they have a name for when you have a new crush. Like, oh, Max has this George over there, and he's going to go through a certain cycle with George. Just be patient. He'll get over it.
Right.
You know, but it's a little different when we all live in the same community and we live in some of the same houses and we are empathetic with each other. Um, like I would say in response to Jiminy, not that your feelings were wrong and that you were just, your mind was making it up, but that actually part of your inner being actually did feel like, what the hell's going on?
Oh, yeah, and yeah, I mean, it was a good growth experience too. It's like, you know, throughout, it's like, you know, after Brad and I talked yesterday, it's like, you know, started to realize it's like, okay, yeah, some of it, you know, was me like looking for evidence to prove my what I was thinking up here, and wasn't really happening. It was just me looking for what my inner child probably needed or to protect itself.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
there were a couple things like, I mean, it does come back to communication. So when I left Friday to go away for the weekend with a relatively new lover to go and have some time out in nature, I could have said, "Hey, Summer and I are going to be enjoying some time at the lake. We just want to have a weekend together, and I hope that you'll come on Monday." Like it would have been like, I'm communicating that I intend to share this amount of time with so and so, and that I look forward to seeing you again. But that communication got dropped,
Yeah.
which, you know, I can blame on technicalities and I didn't have a phone and all these things, but it could have been done. So it was an oversight. And the reality is, I'd like to point out that among the four of us in the course of the last 5 years, I don't think we've had any major concern or scare as a foursome. Like I don't remember anything coming up where we, all of us are shaking our heads. Like there wasn't a time when Philippe was concerned that I might be running off somewhere with Max, or that or that I ever had a thought about Jimmy being with Philippe for 2 weeks. You know, it's like sometimes we disappear for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But the minute that a new element comes in, like, I mean, we're asking for it, creating this workshop called Polyamory, Utopia, or Disaster. It's like, we've never had a disaster. Maybe you have to be careful about the words you use because you inadvertently. But it wasn't a disaster, but it was a great learning experience, which I felt sad about because it created hardship or pain, but I suppose it was a growing pain to be sure to communicate what you need. It doesn't hurt someone to say, hey, I think I want to go somewhere with Summer for the weekend. What do you think? Or at least check in and go, what do you think? We have talked about it in the past, and I told him I was going to go to the lake with Summer, but it wasn't like a communication about how long or whether he was welcome or any of those things.
And at the same time, I'm trying to give them space to explore and yeah, let that develop however it's going to develop. So
Yeah, it seems to be that like all of all of even so often the mistakes so-called that we make, and the next thing is actually the willingness to communicate. That's the next one. So you're leading right in, but it's so often the lack of communication happens because we want to protect the other person. We don't, because we do care.
We want to protect ourselves from what the other person may be feeling.
But also like Jiminy was just saying, I know that Jim is so giving and aware about the space between Max and I. You're unbelievably aware and like
generous
and everything. So that can, it's so great and it's so appreciated, but I love that you, Jim, are stepping up to actually asking for what you need as well, rather than erring on the side of not getting what you need because you care so much about everybody else. So for me, that's like whatever discomfort you went through with this is worth it, hopefully, so that you can be even more of an advocate for yourself.
Give that a voice. I often get the feeling like I could tell I'm probably similar to Jim in that I'll try to avoid conflict, even though I secretly enjoy it. So I get a little itch inside myself when there's something I need to say to Philippe, and it can be like, oh, like I'm going to go out tonight, see my whatever fuck buddy or whatever, and just talk about it, which is we have a really good healthy habit of doing that. So for me it's like listening to that little itch, and sometimes it's finding the right timing, not just always to blast things out until there's a space to be heard.
Yeah, I think that's why we say the willingness to communicate, because we're not all going to be able to communicate perfectly all the time, because we don't know what we want to communicate, or the person may not be receptive to it and it might feel like the wrong time. But just the willingness to say what needs to be said, like you just learned, Brad. That's such a beautiful example, and I've experienced that before too, where I'm like, I know that Jim and I are going to go do something, but I wait for a few days to tell Max because it's kind of uncomfortable for me to do that. And I know that I have the willingness that I want it to come out, so.
Right, and it gives me and Max a good chance to fuck if you do that. When they had theater rehearsals like 6 fucking weeks in a row, and like Jimmy had theater every night because he's with Philippe at the theater being the stage manager, and Max was like, let's get together. Unfortunately, near the end, we didn't think of it early enough that we could have been in the hot tub and having all kinds of fun.
And it's a good example of, this is another type of communication where Philippe had a need, I believe, for someone to really appreciate his, passion for theater as a director, for support in, putting his plays on stage. And Jiminy, it was like pretty amazing. Maybe there's some divine intervention here. Actually kind of, you not only were receptive to that, but it became something that you became passionate about yourself. So Philippe and Jim often are away on rehearsal, like for a long time, sometimes it seems like for months. I'm a person that really enjoys being alone. So, and I'm so glad to not be behind stage myself. Like I would not be having fun. So, and yet like Brad and I have a very, kind of wild, erratic side that we experience together with each other. So it satisfies, like I can have a sexual wild experience with Brad that I'm not having with Philippe. And that's great for you as well. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. I want to draw attention to the jealousy that can come up with somebody's life endeavors as well as their relationship. So, You know, when Jimmy started getting into theater, I saw a major change coming. Like, he's going to be spending a lot more time in theater. That's less time that he's with me. And then the mind goes off and goes, you know, he may go on the road and he'll be gone for months. You know, who knows? He'll be so occupied, he'll forget about me. Like, that's the train wreck that I can go down. So it's not always that the jealousy is about another person. I had a past lover that was jealous because I spent so much time with my spiritual practice, which is writing, meditating, chanting. And when I was doing that, I wasn't with him.
Sure.
And I've had clients come to me because I work as a sacred intimate. And I once saw a guy who was a great dancer and he loved to do country line dancing. But he was with a person who said, you're going to have to choose between the dancing and me, baby. Because when you're out country line dancing, you're not with me and I miss you. So there was this brief moment of fear, like Jimmy's going to go on another path. He's going to quit doing his technical job because he's such a big tech whiz and he's going to become a theater guy. And you know what that means? He's going to be a gypsy like I used to be. And none of that happened. Instead, me and Max strengthened our relationship. I got to go to these beautiful performances. I got more interested in the process of theater. I got to see him really flourish. And this is the key of another thing that's coming up in the discussion called compersion. And that, like, when theater and stage management started to be his passion, I saw a part of him come alive and I genuinely felt happy. Like, it gave me such joy to go to those performances and realize what he had helped create. I never knew what was coming, just like I wouldn't knew what was coming if there were a new lover in their lives.
Yeah. We're going to have a whole one of these sections is going to be devoted to jealousy and compersion.
Okay.
It's such a big piece of what we're talking about.
If you're not familiar with the term, compersion is having satisfaction, enjoyment, or compassion for the pleasure that your partner may be experiencing elsewhere or with someone else.
So
let's do the next.
So the other one, the next one was the willingness to communicate, and we've kind of covered that. And the other one was the willingness to be vulnerable and human. And in some ways, these are all the same thing. Like all of the things we've talked about, these 5 points, but they just are their kind of, subtle, nuanced pieces of that puzzle. Of what it is to be in relationship that works to me. And that can be, if you're this moment right now, for instance, Brad was willing to be vulnerable. Jim was willing to be vulnerable with each other, and they're also being vulnerable with us and also with you. And it's not always so easy to be vulnerable. And also there's times when you can't be vulnerable. It's not safe, or doesn't feel right. But the willingness to be able to be vulnerable in front of somebody that you love and loves you, for me, it's it's the best.
Worth it.
It makes everything work. You want to say anything about that?
That is to the point. I'd like to open up to some questions. If any of you would unmute and share something of your experience or question that we could stimulate a deepening of the conversation.
Anyone have a question?
All right, raise a hand if you have some thoughts.
I'll start. I'm Mikey, I'm Australian, I'm 36 years old. I've started seeing someone who is poly, and he's very much an anarchist, if you're familiar with that term, a relationship anarchist. And I've only been in monogamous relationships prior to that, and I'm finding this dynamic to be really, really refreshing. And I think there's something around kind of the unconditional kind of love things I was kind of reading that you guys were talking about there that is really interesting. I don't know if I'm poly yet or not, so I'm kind of curious kind of what age you kind of like started playing around with that, and what was your journey from going from kind of monogamy to polyamory?
Yeah, good question. And I like your attitude because you're really willing to explore without maybe knowing the answer yet,
Yeah.
which is beautiful.
And also people, you can be poly at one point in your life and then be monogamous again, and then you can be poly again, and you could, so there isn't a thing where you have to make a decision that I am now a poly person and I will be forever, although some of us have.
Although it might be too, and this would be an example of finding the right relationship with this particular partner and discovering the boundaries that work for you. So I think for a lot of us, myself, I started probably around, right in college, 2022, and had multiple relationships with a group of friends. There were 5 of us that were sexual and friends, and one that was a girlfriend in that process as well. So not too unlike what I'm doing now, but it was much, in those days too, much more unspoken. So we didn't have a language to talk about our experience, even though we sort of did. So for me, it was a gradual opening up to being more willing to speak about that, including being married and to a bisexual person and raising children in a in a bisexual environment. Really being tested. I would not say it was easy.
For me, I've always been polyamorous. I fell in love with a boy and a girl in first grade and continued to do that. And my issue was that I entered into relationships and thought they were poly, but I was poly and they weren't, except they were actually having more sex with other people than I was, but they didn't. So it wasn't until I was 49 or 50 when I met Max that I entered into a fully conscious polyamorous relationship. The other ones have been open, but fraught with all kinds of, at the end of the relationship, they would often say, you drug me into this poly thing. I never wanted to be, it wasn't my, I'm like, really? I didn't know, you do. So yeah, that's my story.
I remember telling I've had basically three long-term lovers in my life, and Jimmy's the third. And I remember telling the first 2 that I was not monogamous. I wanted to be very clear. But basing your framework on the comparison to monogamy and using the word not, it just didn't really help in either of those relationships. And I can say that honestly, this is the first vibrantly successful, wonderful polyamorous experience I've ever had. But to that, I must add, it's always evolving. And I don't think anything is overnight. It's really about being attentive to right where you are. This is beyond my wildest dreams. I couldn't have planned it. So it took a lot of being attentive in each present moment to what steps being taken, how I feel. There's time. Sometimes it takes time. And then just to celebrate and be grateful for what really does work. Pay attention to what works.
For me, let's see. It's been primarily serial monogamy. My last relationship before Philippe and Brad was more of had evolved to a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, which didn't really work. Yeah, and I guess I was about 49 or 50, I guess, when I met Philippe, and I don't know how old I was. You probably know how old I was when I met you.
55
Not
now.
very old.
I'll be 55.
So he was like 47.
So about 47 when I met Brad.
I was 39.
And I guess until like I had gotten together with Philippe, and then Brad decided he wanted to start dating me too. I'm not even sure I knew the word polyamory at that point. Until like, I guess I got with Philippe and then found out it's like, oh, he had a partner, and like, oh, how does that work, and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm kind of learning as I go, and yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
It does. Thank you for sharing.
And Darren is asking what our living arrangements and what our ages are.
Yeah.
Darren, why don't you say it in your own words? What are you most curious about?
So it does seem like can you hear me?
That's
Yeah.
barely.
Okay, so it does seem like people mature into the polypod arrangement. So I'm 59, but it's sort of since turning 50, I've been open to hearing, being receptive to learning more about polyamorous relationships. So you, your ages, I think, are interesting. So that's kind of what we're all, we have gray. So I know you're over 40.
I'm 67.
I'm 62.
I'm coming up on 55.
Oh, goody.
47. I've never heard Max's age till today, by the way.
Top secret. Yeah, I think that I'm your daddy. Yeah, Philippe and I have lived together for 12 years. And I think you're right. I think at this present time, it's something that people are growing into. That takes some emotional maturity. Though some of our favorite polyamorous type of friends are in their late 20s in Asheville. So they are also mature enough to handle it because they're in a different generation.
Yeah. And in a community of like-minded individuals where they're open, receptive to each other. So I think you just create an energy that people are receptive to, which I think sometimes opens conversation. So just like when developing a primary relationship, you're looking for words, body language, and opening up yourself to being interested in what other people have developed for themselves, and then you want a piece of that, or you want to hear more. So I find myself gravitating towards poly relationships because they're also different, and you want to hear a little bit more of how it works for that couple, and can that then work for you, and how can you maybe incorporate yourself. I think we all have relationships that we would like to join that are not open, receptive to the third person or the fourth person. And I also think, the polypod, or, two couples merging is, I think it's a way to sort of navigate, the single person, which possibly, the jealousy factor of the third person interrupting the primary relationship. That's another sort of nuancing of the number of individuals involved in the pod, the primary pod.
I'd love to respond to that if I may, really briefly. That again, what Daryl is pointing out, which is Darren is pointing out, is so inspiring. I'm just hanging onto the edge of my seat here because I'm so appreciative of these questions. I've never heard them spoken. And that's the brilliance of what we're doing, is we're creating a path that did not exist. And if it were not for all the people I've had a chance to observe, I would be lost. I mean, I still cling to words I heard in one workshop in Hawaii with Kamala Devi, who had a show on Showtime about mainly hetero-oriented polyamory with some homo stuff. And she said, she used the word pod, she referred to saplings and established trees in a grove. She spoke about how somebody can come into your pod that's like a meteor and they activate and energize the whole pod. In fact, I don't think I had heard the word pod until I attended one short workshop with Kamala Devi at a Tantra festival. So I think what is coming up with Darren is the importance of really paying attention to what works for you and noticing what really works for other people. Because there may be books about it, but I don't know if there's a book that explains what Jimmy and Philippe and Max and I have explained today. is something to be learned in every moment. We just all happen to be tantrikas, which means our life is about experimenting, learning, and growing. If we're not experimenting, learning, and growing, we're dead. And when we're doing those experiments, we're observing and taking notes all the time. You know, we're not just doing it haphazardly, but paying attention to what works for you, and noticing what's worked for other people, and taking inspiration and running with it. Yeah.
I hope, Darren, that you can be here next week.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I ran into the same trouble signing up for multiple workshops at once, because I was going to buy all 4 workshops at once, but it doesn't really let you do that.
Oh.
So
It's a mess.
We're trying to figure it out. It's a very weird thing with Eventbrite, so.
But I was going to say,
we're sorry about that.
We're going to talk about different poly styles, and there's so many, you know, more than we can talk about right now. But the greatest insight that I found from the study and reading Kamala Devi that you mentioned, who's a brilliant teacher, is it's giving yourself permission to find an erotic family that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And often people say, like, you have 2 choices, mono or poly. And it's not really the case. There's so many variations, an infinite number, and it has to do with taking the initiative to be outside of the box.
yeah. What's the last, Kamala, what's the last name?
Devi, Devi.
Okay.
By a lot of lawnmowers and vacuums, so it's really hard to hear. But
It looks like you guys are on your rooftop.
we are.
They're in Provincetown, and
Oh.
Jiminy and I are here in Asheville. We went
That's
to all be in the same place.
quite a ways away from each other.
Yeah, it happens. We've been further away before. I was in Russia last year this time. Didn't take any lovers with me.
If you have a question you'd like to peek in there.
Who?
So another issue is dealing with your primary partner's assessment of your boyfriends. So when your primary says, you know, the guy that you're hanging out with is not good for you, he's not good for us,
Mm-hmm.
but you're sexually drawn to the energy from that person, how do you, I mean, that's navigating those constraints that are put on by your primary partner's needs. How do you navigate that?
I think we're going to probably discuss that in one of the other sessions that we do. We'll go deep into that. Because that is a big,
really good question.
That's a really good question. But I think it will take longer to dive into that one. That's a good one.
That reminds me of like what you see in media a lot is a female body person going, how, you know, in outrage, how dare you, da 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 da, like you were looking at that waitress or whatever. And then the guy's going on like defending themselves by saying, I was not, you're just making it up. You know, I didn't do anything. It wasn't what you think. So it's interesting we have this culture of denial rather than accepting that the experience she's having as a vulnerable being is just discomfort. And, you know, maybe like we have a friend that says she just cruises everybody in restaurants. It doesn't mean she wants to have sex with them. She's just a natural cruiser.
I do too.
I think Philippe is too. And it's so fun. But some people are trained to think that means that you don't love me.
Yeah.
We're all made so differently. We all have our different, just such different vehicles and different ways of expressing and different ways of moving through the world, often which are just unconscious. They could be leftovers from our ancestral DNA, or they could be things, you know, that we learned as we were growing up, styles of relationship. And, or they could just be part of, you know, who we are as people. So one of the things is the curiosity, having the curiosity to really learn who the people you're in relationship with are as you go along, rather than trying to turn them into something you want them to be, which is, you know, we'll probably discuss that in a later episode as well. That was one of the things which, you know, realizing and honoring that each person is their own unique being. And it's all about, for me, relationship is about curiosity, finding out who you are continually, continually, continually. And I like to be surprised. The reason that I've been together with Max for 12 years is that he surprises me continually. Otherwise, I would be like, bye-bye.
I'm wondering if somebody else has a burning desire or question they'd love to ask.
There was a question I saw, maybe we answered it, I can't remember. Somebody was asking about living arrangements. Brad and I each live in our own spaces, and Max and Philippe do share a home together.
Did you want to say something, Dave?
Yeah. So I have a lot of friends that are, as far as I know, in very strong monogamous relationships. And one of the things that I would always be concerned about is like even asking the question, would they be willing to let someone else into their pod, if you will, and doing that without jeopardizing the friendship. That's, you know, been something of a concern. If, you know, just to ask that question, would that, you know, potentially have an impact on the friendship, which you have a lot of people that you would not want to lose a friendship over, you know, just the point of even asking the question. So what would you guys, you know, maybe suggest as a way of kind of easing into asking that question without potentially ruining the friendship?
Well, are these people who are like flirting with you? So you've already gotten like a little bit of a feeling?
A little bit of a vibe, and like people that I've known for quite a while. So like I said, a very strong friendship has developed over, you know, quite a long period of time.
That's a good one, because my initial response is to be like, well, if the relationship is really worth it, the friendship, then not just one little question shouldn't, you know, it shouldn't really destroy a friendship. But at the same time, I realize that for some people, that could be very uncomfortable to have that line crossed by a friend. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think I would, which is kind of my approach anyway, would be to make it impersonal. And it, you know these people well, but it's like, you know, what do you do for sexual variety? Do you ever include a third? Like, you know, just asking. And I think, you know, you being psychologically savvy is like, it's finding that moment of curiosity without feeling needy.
Right.
Whatever the response is going to be good information. But that's a good example of vulnerability.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, I love what Max said, to find that moment of curiosity, to just ask them, you know, a general question about their lives rather than making it too personal. And my input as a major slut who just loves to have sex with lots of men is I would start in a bathhouse, or I would go, I mean, that's what I would do. I'm not suggesting that would work for you, but I think to actively seek people who clearly are looking for a third. And I find a lot of joy and celebration and sexual interaction with people that I don't have intricate, complex emotional relationships with yet. I mean, there's one approach that you can have the deep foundation and strength of an emotional relationship. And there's the other approach that there's just no better way to meet someone than in the middle of an orgy. That's my approach. So my approach would be to look for people online or publicly or at events that clearly are asking for some fun with a third or a fourth and start there to explore and take into account what Max said, because that's excellent advice to just inquire and be curious. Both and all. For the slut and the more conservative party goer.
Okay.
Aside, but I'm curious. I often hear people say 3 ways don't work for me, and I'm almost curious to watch one of those 3 ways and watch, like, find out what it isn't that doesn't work. But let's say, like, if Jiminy and Philippe are passionately making out and I'm on the bed, like, I love to watch, you know, and to me that could be a total turn on. I don't need to be in the middle of 2 people every moment. Mm-hmm. So even to, you know, Dave's question, even to enter in, like, I just want to jump in, I would just want to sleep between the 2 of you. I could see the vulnerability of some people have a very one-on-one, like an extreme discomfort with a third.
And it may not be personal at all. You know, it just,
it's really interesting.
The way our kind of auras intermingle with each other can be really different from person to person. So
for some people, triggers like I'm leaving someone out, like I have to pay attention to Joe because he's being left out, or like that it's not a natural flow as compared to what Brad's saying. You know, look for people that are in that flow already,
yeah,
and looking for more of it.
I'm
yeah, go ahead.
excited. I have another idea too. I don't know how many of you have subscribed to Hemrose TV, but there's a video we made here in Asheville a few years ago called "It Takes a Village." And if you don't know about this yet, you can have a link on my website to go to Hemrose. But and it's a 3-minute video. I've been hoping maybe I can just make it available, because it's almost like a trailer. When in the early days we didn't think America had an attention span, or the world had an attention span for longer videos. But this video has me and Jimmy in it, and all we're doing is we're cooking dinner, we're playing the guitar while 2 gorgeous men fuck on the couch. And it presents a model that there are many kinds of polyamory. It doesn't mean you're in the middle of it, as was just demonstrated. Like the fact that I was playing the guitar and he was making dinner, even though I must say making dinner was staged. He was actually boiling water, but you don't have to know that. It was all a little bit on camera, but we wanted to demonstrate this principle that your fucking and your love and your sex are going to be better when you have a community who support you. And you know, one version of supportive community is if I live in a house and 2 people are fucking on the couch, the best support may not be for me to stand and watch and to jack off. It might be for me to walk by and wave and say, oh, that's so beautiful, and then go about my day. Or it might be, hey, do you guys need some water? Like, when does the support for our loving community come from a place of unconditional love? And when does it come from, I want, I need? Because if I stop and I'm jacking off right in their face and I'm interrupting their scene, that's not supportive. But I could be polyamorous by standing, loving them, asking what they need, or just knowing and walking by and singing in the next room about love, you know. And so we made a video about that, which really excited me. And maybe this conversation inspires me to make it more available. But for now, there's a link on my website if you want to check it out. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things we love about you, Brad, is you always stretch the boundaries into a more interesting perspective. Dave agrees. Wow. Excellent. So we're going to complete for today. If any of you would like to send email with other questions, feel free to do so. We'll include some other things in next week. And we will post the video on one of our YouTube stations so that it could be shared.
And you'll just email that to the group who were here today, the link. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for courageously showing up and being present, because what comes out of us is a reflection of who's here. Like, this didn't just randomly emerge, like you brought it forth. And I would say the group that converges next week and the week after will continue to bring forth a wealth of info. So your being here brings something alive that's going to benefit a lot of people. Just thanks for being willing to share and be so open and present.
Yeah, thank you. And even in a small group like this, the intimacy is good fuel for all of us.
Okay.
So complete?
Yeah.
Same time, same place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're all so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cute. Dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun.
All right. Guess we're gonna end.
Thank you.
See y'all.
We can hang outside and say hey.
Hey, Dave.
Hey. So you're really enjoying P-Town, huh?
Oh yeah. Super fun.
Yeah.
One of our